there comes a point where everybody kind of looks around and goes, yeah, we were kind of wrong about what we thought that was. And now there's a sort of more, a greater understanding of the value.
So, I mean, listen, you brought up Sabbath, and I know you said no band inspires you more. And you said that everything with you begins and ends with Sabbath. What is it about Sabbath? I mean, I know what it is about Sabbath for me, but what is it about Sabbath for you that hooks you so much?
Sabbath was the first band I really personally connected with. Like, I love the Beatles. When I was 5 years old, I started listening to the Beatles. But Sabbath, it was like they were making music for me, and I don't know what that meant. I couldn't even really articulate it even today. I always call it cosmic Sabbath. There's something
Mm.
about Sabbath that makes me think about the stars and the moon, and it's a big, crazy universe out there, and we're just kind of navigating here on this little planet. There's a humanity in Sabbath that I love. It's hard to put your finger on, but certainly having met them and seeing who they are as people, it kind of makes sense to me. I once had this conversation with Tony Iommi, and he was talking about how every time they came down from Birmingham to London, they would get creamed by the press.
Huh.
And I was like, I don't understand. Like, you guys were, they were hugely successful. And people pretty much recognized early on that there was something going on with Sabbath. They were a big band. He's like, yeah, but we were from Birmingham and we weren't from London. And because we weren't from London, we just could always get bad press. And every time we got in the van to go down to London, we kind of groaned like, here we go. Like, we know we're going to go do our trip and we're going to be fucking Black Sabbath. But in the back of our minds, we know that some guy's just going to have a go with us.
But that humanity there, like it's easy for me to kind of sit back and think, Sabbath, they're untouchable. They're this, like you said, Ozzy's a cultural institution, and yet there's this humanity to them where no, someone's still gonna treat them like like trash
But
on this one
I guess
interview.
to make it about us for a second, I think the commonality between us and bands like Thin Lizzy or Judas Priest or Black Sabbath and even Queen to a certain extent, it's the connection because people really came from this kind of working class background and they made very aspirational music. And somewhere in there, some critic just doesn't like the way they walk or the things they're singing about. It's like there's that famous quote from David Lee Roth where he says, I can't remember if they're talking about like Marshall Crenshaw or something, and he said, of course they all like Marshall Crenshaw because they all look like him. They don't look like David Lee Roth. I mean,
Right? Yeah.
Same thing. Halen, same thing. Never a critics band, but one of the most beloved bands. I mean, we saw the outpouring of love for Eddie when he passed away. I mean, it was almost shocking. And I'm a huge Van Halen fan. I was shocked as a fan how much love there was for Eddie. And that shows you that it's that connection that most of the world is really from a humble place. They got to figure out how to pay their bills, and everybody's got struggles, and you got somebody in your family who's dealing with addiction or whatever. This is most of the world's reality, at least in the Western world. And yet, if you look at what most of the media will focus on historically in rock and alternative, it's a bunch of other stuff that doesn't have to do with that. It's a bunch of other values, and they tend to more come out of colleges and stuff like that.
Huh. Yeah.
So I tend to emotionally identify with people who are representing for me kind of a guide map of how to get out of the burbs and into the stars. And that's why Sabbath, like at 8 years old, I heard Sabbath and I felt that like, oh my God, what is that feeling?
So as an 8-year-old Billy Corgan listening to Sabbath, then saying, "Oh, I had this conversation with Tony Iommi," like that's wild, man. That's just
No,
wild.
we're far past me pinching myself.
No, I
If I
know,
could
I
tell
know.
if I could tell you all the heroes I met and
Yeah.
got to talk to and ask the total fanboy questions. When I worked with Tony on his solo record, which came out like 98, 99. I mean, I was in the studio for 6 days with Tony. I mean, you want to talk about like a dream. And he's just the greatest. He's just such a gentleman. He's so kind, so encouraging. I mean, I can't say enough good things about Tony. I just love him with all my heart.